4 days. That's how long the FBI sat on the sideline while an 84-year-old woman was missing somewhere in the Tucson desert. Not 48 hours, not a weekend, 4 full days. And when Cash Patel, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, finally said that out loud on a national podcast, the Pima County Sheriff's Office came out swinging with a statement that was so carefully worded, so perfectly laundered through a public information officer, that it managed to say absolutely nothing while sounding like it said everything. And that's what bothers me, not the turf war itself. Those happen, not even the 4 days, as infuriating as that is. What bothers me is that while 2 agencies were drawing their lines in the sand, Nancy Guthrie's trail was going cold. Every hour without a grid search is an hour the desert has to work against you. Every day without forensic processing is a day biological evidence degrades. Every decision driven by ego is a decision that didn't get driven by the case. And here we are. If you've been following the Nancy Guthrie investigation and you want every new development broken down the moment it surfaces, hit subscribe to Redacted Files Lab. Ring the bell, because this case is not over, and I am not stopping until someone answers for what happened to this woman. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand how badly this investigation stumbled, you have to understand what should have happened and then stack that against what actually did. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives alone in a quiet residential neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. She is not the kind of person who disappears. She has a family. She has a routine. She has a pacemaker, which means she also has something most missing persons don't, a digital paper trail embedded in her own body. Her watch was connected to her pacemaker monitoring system. That device was logging her biometric data in real time, heart rate, movement, activity. So from the moment she was reported missing, investigators had something that most cases would kill for, a technology timeline. And yet, the figure appears on a Ring doorbell camera sometime in the early morning hours. A man, standing in the shadow of the archway, not running, not rushing, standing, the way someone stands when they've been somewhere before and they're not worried about being seen. And here's the thing that most people glossed over when this image went public. That image almost didn't exist. Nancy's Ring camera didn't have an active subscription. That means it wasn't automatically uploading footage to the cloud in real time. That means that without immediate intervention, whatever was captured in the local cache was going to disappear on its own schedule. The FBI knew this, which is why Cash Patel personally called Google leadership and asked them to reach into the cache before the data self-deleted. That is the image you saw. That is the image that became the biggest break in this case. And according to Patel, it could have been retrieved days earlier, maybe more of it, maybe footage that answered questions we're still asking right now. But the FBI wasn't in the door yet. Here's the part that nobody wants to talk about plainly. When a missing persons case of this magnitude goes active, federal resources don't wait for a formal invitation. The FBI's evidence response team, the task force structure, the lab at Quantico, these are tools that get offered immediately and deployed fast. What Patel describes is a phone call that went out from the FBI within hours, essentially saying, "We are here. We have everything you need. What do you need from us?" And the answer from Pima County was, essentially, "We're fine. Stand by. We'll call if we need you. 4 days. I need you to understand what happens inside an investigation in the first 4 days. Forensic evidence has a shelf life. Witness memory has a shelf life. Surveillance footage, as we just discussed with the Ring cache, has a shelf life. The concept of the first 48 isn't just a TV show. It's an operational doctrine built on decades of case analysis. The window in which you can most reliably collect physical evidence, identify a suspect's vehicle, canvass the area, pull surveillance from businesses and neighbors, cross-reference digital data. That window compresses fast. Not because law enforcement gets lazy after 48 hours, because the world keeps moving. Cars get repainted, phones get wiped, people leave town, memories blur, rain falls, and the supervisor assigned to oversee this investigation had never worked a homicide case. I know how that sounds, and I want to be careful here, because I'm not trying to pile on an individual. Inexperience isn't incompetence. It's just inexperience. But you don't put a first-year surgery resident in charge of a cardiac unit during a crisis. You don't hand the controls of the most high-profile disappearance case in decades, a case that a retired detective with over 40 years of experience compared, in scale and public attention, to the Lindbergh kidnapping, to someone who has never navigated a homicide investigation. Not when the FBI Evidence Response Team is standing right outside the door. Look at the press conferences. Not at what was said, at what was shown. That first press conference, it's the sheriff and his team. No FBI presence behind him. None. 2 press conferences later, 2 FBI agents appear in the frame. That sequencing tells you everything. That is the visual record of a turf negotiation playing out in real time, in public, while a family waited for answers. Now, here's the second thing that came out in the Cash Patel interview, and this one is more complicated, so stay with me. The DNA evidence. There was a hair sample collected at the scene, a physical piece of biological evidence that, depending on what it could yield, might have identified a suspect. The Pima County Sheriff's Office has an in-house rapid DNA machine, the kind that can generate an initial genetic profile in roughly 4 hours, fast enough to give investigators a preliminary direction. But the machine was down at the time, so the sample went to Phoenix first, then got shipped to a private accredited lab in Florida, a lab the department apparently uses routinely for casework. Cash Patel says he had a fixed-wing aircraft sitting on a runway at Tucson's airport, a plane that could have moved that sample directly to Quantico, the FBI's lab, that night. He's not bluffing about the logistics of that, by the way. Federal law enforcement routinely coordinates with Customs and Border Protection and the Department of Homeland Security for exactly this kind of transport. You pick up a phone, you say, I need a plane at this time for this destination, and it happens. The infrastructure exists precisely for moments like this one. Now, and this is where I want to be honest with you because I think it matters, the private lab in Florida is not necessarily inferior. The idea that only Quantico can do quality forensic work is a popular misconception. Some of the most pivotal DNA processing in American true crime history was done by private labs. The break in the Golden State Killer case came through a consumer genealogy database, not a federal facility. The Long Island serial killer case, a man who allegedly took the lives of at least 10 people over decades, ultimately advanced significantly through private forensic work. Labs get accredited for a reason. The sheriff's department wasn't cutting corners by using a contractor they had an established relationship with. But here's what is not in dispute. Quantico would have been faster. The FBI can fast-track samples in active, high-profile cases. They have the capacity, they have the priority protocols, and they had a plane on the ground. The sheriff's department made a jurisdictional call, which is entirely within their legal authority, and sent the sample to Florida. And Cash Patel thinks that was the wrong call. Whether it was or wasn't, the damage was done, and the public is left watching 2 agencies debate the decision in press statements and podcast appearances instead of finding Nancy Guthrie. If this case infuriates you as much as it infuriates me, and it should, subscribe to Redacted Files Lab. We are going to keep watching this until there are answers. Now, I want to get into the part of this case that I think deserves more attention than it's gotten, the vehicle theory, because a retired homicide detective I've been following on this case has been saying something since almost the beginning that I think is exactly right. A car is going to crack this open. Think about the figure on the Ring camera. He didn't appear out of nowhere. A neighborhood like that, residential, relatively quiet, you don't casually materialize in someone's archway at 2 in the morning. And how do we know it was approximately 2 in the morning? Not from metadata, because the sheriff's office initially couldn't confirm the timestamp on the footage. We know it from a shadow. An astronomer analyzing the angle and length of the shadow cast by the figure on the concrete cross-referenced the position of the moon that night. It was a full moon, and calculated the time frame based on lunar position and shadow projection. The answer came back. Approximately 2 yaos a.m. This is not science fiction. This is exactly what investigators have done for decades, calling in specialists from oceanography, meteorology, forensic astronomy, to extract data from evidence that doesn't announce itself in obvious ways. And that timestamp matters because it can now be stacked against the biometric data from Nancy's pacemaker monitoring system. Her watch disconnected from her device at a specific point that night. Was that before the figure appeared or after? The sequencing of those 2 events could tell investigators an enormous amount about what actually happened inside that home. This is the kind of detail that doesn't make headlines, but drives investigations forward. Back to the vehicle. If this individual conducted pre-surveillance and the level of comfort he displays on camera strongly suggests he had been in that environment before, then he arrived in a car. Multiple times. And Tucson has something called the Flock system, F-L-O-C-K. It's a network of license plate reader cameras deployed throughout the city and surrounding areas. Every vehicle that passes through a Flock reader gets logged. The plate, the make, the model, the timestamp, the location. If this person drove through the same neighborhood multiple times in the weeks or months before Nancy's disappearance, there is a record of it somewhere in that system. This is also why investigators appeared to be pulling Range Rover surveillance, why they showed up at gun stores with lists, why they asked the public for specific dates and times on home video. They are trying to connect an exterior camera sighting to an interior neighborhood sighting, two rings of surveillance data that, if they overlap, give you a vehicle. A vehicle gives you a registered owner. A registered owner gives you a name. This is investigative work done right. Patient, methodical, tech-driven. And this is exactly the kind of canvas the FBI's 100-agent resources are built to execute in a single day. Every body shop in Tucson? One day if the FBI is fully in. A vehicle that's been painted, sold, or salvaged. Federal resources can chase that paper trail in ways a county sheriff's department simply cannot match in scale. Here's the theory I keep coming back to, and I want to be explicit that this is analysis, not accusation. The figure on the porch, he wasn't the architect. He moved too casually, too deliberately, but without the kind of spatial awareness that someone who planned this operation would display. A true orchestrator doesn't stand in front of a camera. He doesn't linger. The working theory among some investigators is that this man was the worker, the person on the ground, and that somewhere behind the curtain, there is someone considerably smarter who put this in motion. A second individual may have been nearby, staged in a vehicle, on a walkie-talkie, ready to move when the moment came. The operational plan may have even shifted at the last moment. What looked like an entry through one point may have been a redirect. The fact that tips, reward money, and public pressure haven't produced a breakthrough yet is consistent with this theory. If you were the worker, you answer to someone. You don't flip on your own organization for a tip line reward, especially if you're local, and the behavioral evidence strongly suggests this person is local. He blends. He knows the rhythms of that neighborhood. He doesn't panic when a light comes on or a dog barks. That level of environmental comfort doesn't come from one reconnaissance trip. It comes from familiarity. There's also the matter of why the case has gone quiet in the media cycle, despite an active reward. Some of that is institutional. The turf war between agencies creates confusion about who's holding what information and who's authorized to release it. But some of it, I suspect, is tactical. The FBI doesn't tip its hand. If they've run a flock trace and identified a vehicle, you won't hear about it until there's an arrest. If they've canvassed body shops and found something, that information stays inside the investigation until a prosecutor tells them they can move. Silence in a case like this doesn't always mean cold. Sometimes silence means someone is about to get very loud, all at once. And then there is the family, Savannah Guthrie's family. These are people who have been watching two government agencies spend public energy arguing about jurisdiction and press statements while their 84-year-old matriarch has been missing for weeks. The silence from the family's public interface, the absence of joint press conferences, the lack of coordinated official messaging, that's not random. That's a symptom of an investigation that got fractured at the administrative level before it could unify at the operational level. The agents and deputies on the ground almost certainly don't care about the turf war. They care about finding Nancy. But the decisions made at the top, who gets access, which lab gets the sample, who stands behind the sheriff at the first press conference, those decisions have consequences that work their way down to the case itself. This is what a failure of institutional leadership looks like in practice. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a series of small calls made for the wrong reasons by people who were either too inexperienced to know better or too proud to ask for help. The case of Nancy Guthrie is not cold. There are too many digital threads still unspooled, the flock network data, the biometric timeline from her pacemaker device, the ongoing forensic processing of the DNA sample, the active cooperation between the Florida lab and Quantico that the sheriff's statement confirmed, however grudgingly. The investigative machinery is running. The question is whether it's running fast enough and whether the people at the top of both agencies are going to get out of the way and let the people who actually know how to work a case do their jobs. Cash Patel went on a podcast and said the quiet part out loud. The sheriff responded with a statement that read like it was drafted by a liability attorney. And somewhere in the Tucson desert, the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie is waiting for someone to find it. If you believe that institutional accountability matters, that how an investigation is run in those first 96 hours determines whether a family gets justice or gets a cold case file, I want to hear from you in the comments. Here's the question I've been sitting with. The DNA sample went to a private lab in Florida instead of Quantico, where a plane was waiting on the tarmac to move it that same night. The sheriff's office says the two labs are collaborating. Patel says they could have had results faster. My question for you is this. When a decision in a missing persons case comes down to jurisdiction and institutional politics, rather than what gives the investigation the best possible shot, who should have the authority to override that? Should there be a federal threshold, a case size, a victim profile, a time window, after which the FBI automatically assumes lead? Or is local jurisdiction, even at cost, a principle worth protecting? Tell me where you land on that. I genuinely want to know. Subscribe to Redacted Files Lab. I cover the cases where the official version and the full story are not the same thing, and I'm not going anywhere until one of them catches up to the other. The next case I'm looking at involves a piece of technology that the prosecution thought would seal a conviction, and instead may have opened a door that nobody is ready to walk through yet.